Good afternoon, and welcome back to Leading with Heart and Intention. Hi, I'm Dr. Inga James, founder and principal consultant at Organizational Renewal Group. Over the last two episodes, we've explored two powerful dimensions of leadership. Empathy includes feeling with others and understanding their emotional reality, and individualization, or seeing each person clearly and tailoring our leadership who they really are. Today, we're going to bring those two together. However, first of all, I want to address the elephant in my room, which is that I have absolutely no technological adeptness at all. And I have had so many problems going live with this podcast, and I'm going to work really hard before my next podcast to work it all out. I apologize for the confusion. Today's episode is about what happens when empathy and individualization are not just personal values, but strategic choices built into the way an organization operates. We're talking about sustainable impact, cultures that don't just survive change, but grow because of it. I'm going to start with a story about a mid-sized human services organization. This organization did important, life-changing work. On paper, they were successful, strong programs, stable funding, and a solid reputation in the community. But behind the scenes, staff were exhausted. Caseloads were heavy, leadership turnover had created uncertainty, and slowly the culture began to fray. More conflict, more sick days, more, I'm not sure how much longer I can do this. By the time a new executive team came in, turnover was high and morale was low. They could have responded with what many organizations try first: new metrics, more oversight, tighter policies. Instead, they made two deceptively simple decisions. They implemented monthly reflective supervision times, dedicated time for staff to talk about the impact of the work on them emotionally and mentally, not just the outcomes for clients. And they introduced flexible workload adjustments based on each staff member's bandwidth, life circumstances, and strengths. In other words, they built empathy and individualization into the structure. In reflective supervision, staff were encouraged to talk honestly, such as, "This case is really weighing on me. I'm feeling stretched too thin. I'm really proud of the work we did on this project, but I'm tired." Supervisors listened, not just to fix, but to understand. Together, they adjusted caseloads, redistributed tasks, and brought in peer support where needed. Within 6 months, the organization saw a 40% drop in turnover. Sick days decreased, and staff surveys reflected higher trust in leadership and stronger commitment to the mission. They didn't change what they did for clients, they changed how they cared for their people. And that's the heart of the episode. Empathy and individualization become renewable energy sources for culture, fueling the organization over the long term, instead of burning people out in the short term. Let's talk about something leaders often worry about: the bottom line. When we talk about empathy, psychological safety, or individualized leadership, some people still say, "That sounds nice, but we're running a business." The research is very clear. Empathy and individualized leadership are not just morally right, they're financially smart. Let's start with turnover. Multiple studies show that losing an employee typically costs somewhere between a half and 2 times that person's salary. Once you add up recruiting, onboarding, lost productivity, and lost institutional knowledge. Layer on top of that the reality that the overall turnover rate in US companies was around 41% in 2023, with some industries seeing rates as high as 79%. The cost is staggering. Now, here's where empathy comes in. A 2025 report on workplace empathy found that employees in unempathetic workplaces are 1.5 times more likely to quit, and estimated that empathy, just empathy, could help US companies avoid up to $180 billion in annual attrition costs. Think about that. billions of dollars tied directly to whether people feel understood, supported, and valued. On the flip side, organizations that invest in engagement, and engagement's closely tied to feeling known and respected, those organizations see dramatic returns. A 2024 study found that companies with highly engaged employees experienced a 21% increase in profitability, a 17% boost in productivity, and a 59% reduction in voluntary turnover. These aren't soft outcomes, these are bottom line results. And culture matters too. Research from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business found that companies with strong, values aligned cultures tend to have higher long term financial returns, even if it means sacrificing some short term gains. More recent work shows that leaders who intentionally build culture and engage people at all levels believe that culture directly strengthens financial performance because it inspires people to exceed expectations. What kind of culture inspires that? One where people are treated as individuals and where empathy is not an afterthought, but a leadership expectation. Global reviews of human-centered leadership now highlight empathy and emotional intelligence as key drivers of productivity, innovation, and adaptability, especially in an age of AI and constant disruption. So when we talk about empathy and individualization, we're not talking about being nice instead of being effective. We're talking about being effective because we care enough to understand people and lead them accordingly. SAS Institute, a global analytics company headquartered in North Carolina, has been led for decades by CEO Jim Goodnight, who is widely regarded as the pioneer of human-centered leadership. His philosophy is simple. If you treat your employees like they make a difference, they will. Goodnight intentionally builds systems of empathy and individualization into the culture. For example, he has on-site healthcare and childcare, which were put into place decades before it became common. He put into place flexible work schedules, and he's created a culture that respects creativity, autonomy, and work-life balance. He approaches leadership with an individualized lens. My job is to remove obstacles so talented people can do their best work. SAS's return on investment was huge and measurable. Turnover at SAS is under 4% compared to the US tech industry average of 20 to 30%. Harvard Business School's case study reports that this low turnover saves SAS about $75 million a year in retention costs alone. Continuous innovation has kept SAS profitable for nearly 5 decades. And SAS is frequently ranked among the best places to work worldwide. Goodnight's leadership model is a real-world example of empathy plus individualization equals sustainability. If I care for my people, they care for the mission. Leaders who ask, what do my people really need to thrive here, and then align their systems, pay and workload, flexibility and recognition, with those needs are practicing empathy and individualization at the strategic level. So how do we take all this, the stories, the research, the inspiration? How do we take this and make it practical in our day-to-day leadership? One simple and valuable and free tactic is the Pulse of the People survey, a simple quarterly check-in with just 3 questions. What's helping you thrive right now? What's getting in the way? What would make your work easier? That's empathy and individualization in 3 sentences. And the key is this: you must close the loop. It's not enough to just collect the data. You need to tell people what you heard, what you're considering, and what you're going to try. Here are a few other ways to operationalize empathy and individualization. You can try the reflective supervision design, as we talked about previously. You can go for a strengths-based role design, use what you know about people's strengths to shape their responsibilities, not just their job titles. Flexible pathways can be incredibly helpful for innovation. What flexible pathways means is that we allow different routes to the same outcome, adjusting schedules, communication channels, or collaboration styles to fit individuals. And then, of course, we must enhance our leadership metrics. We can't just measure leaders on output. We need to measure them on retention, engagement, and team well-being as well. These practices send a powerful message. You are not just a resource, you are a person, and we are paying attention. Empathy without structure burns us out. Structure without empathy drives people away. I'd like to end this series with a moment of reflection. Think about your organization, your team, your sphere of influence. Where do you already model empathy well? Where do your systems still feel impersonal or rigid? What's one process, a meeting, a policy, a feedback loop that could be more human centered? And then a personal question. What would it look like this month to embed empathy and individualization just a little deeper into how you feel, or I'm sorry, how you lead? Maybe it's one conversation, one adjustment to someone's workload, one moment of truly listening. These are small acts, but they compound. When we lead with empathy and individualization, we don't just improve morale, we build resilience. Because in the end, organizational renewal group isn't just about strategy or structure. It's about people who feel valued enough to stay and strong enough to grow. That's strong enough to grow. Thank you for joining me for this 3-part series of Leading with Heart and Intention. If these conversations have sparked ideas or questions for you, I'd love for you to share them with a colleague, with your team, or with me. Please visit my website at renewalgroupllc.com for information about the services offered by Organizational Renewal Group. Stay tuned for my next podcast series, again, 3 episodes, likely around organizational transformation and renewal. And as always, remember, leadership begins with listening.